Okay, hello, welcome to H3, the show about health, hope, and happiness. I'm Alan Friesen, also known as the Acapellist. With me is Brother Scott Sweetman. How you doing tonight, Brother Scott?
I'm doing great. Absolutely. Glad we're here tonight and here together.
Excellent. I don't know if you've watched our show for a while, but recently we talked about James Chestnut, Dr. James Chestnut, and his lovely book, The Innate, what's it called, Scott? Do you have it? Have me?
Yes, I do. But
I
where
got it
did I
over
just set it?
Anyways, his hang on.
I had it. I don't know how you lose an entire book, but I did.
There it is. Okay. So, should have had that prepared. This is the book right here. So, it is the Biological Wellness and Prevention Solution. Eat Well, Move Well, Think Well is what it's called. So, Dr. James Chestnut. Lovely book. Really, really good book. And then we had a viewer who said, hey, this model that Dr. James Chestnut is talking about, there has been another version of this. Tell us who the viewer was. Who was that who shared with us their feedback?
K and then a number. I can't remember what the number was. Apparently they watched the show, and I didn't know that something called the biopsychosocial model was first named in 1952 by Roy Grinker. And then in 1977, it was kind of given the form that we more know of it today by George Engel.
George Engel. Nice.
Yeah. And sorry?
Go ahead. You carry on.
I was just going to say the viewer, Kay, wanted us to look at it and talk about it and see if we thought it was similar to Dr. Chestnut's. Is it sort of his work a continuation or a new take, or to see how it fit in? So we took the challenge.
Kay, we thank you for watching, and we thank you for your interest as well. And thank you for this feedback. Because do you want to just jump into the screen share part there, Scott, or what do you think we should do?
Yeah. So it comes from the name, right? Just to give a little bit of background. It's biological, psycho to do with our psyche and our mental state, and then social, which is cultural, economic parameters that the person exists. Now, in the UK, they actually call it whole person treatment or whole person diagnosis. They give it a different name. Yeah. So
here is Dr. Now, is this the gentleman from the 70s or the gentleman from the 50s?
Based on the work of Dr. Engel in 1977. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Engel, 1977. And you note there's a website on there, helpfulprofessor.com. So as you can read here, biopsychosocial model is a holistic approach to understanding health and illness, considering the interplay between biological, psychological, and social factors. So we got these components: biological, first of the physiological and genetic characteristics of the individual that affect his or her health. Psychological refers to the patient's emotional and psychological state, including anxiety, mood, and consciousness. Social, the social environment and cultural factors that affect human health. And then he has an example. Scott, share with you. You do the example part.
Okay, I just lost you for half a second here. Like I said, you're hidden behind a half dozen windows on me here. Sorry, Al, I've lost you.
Oh, okay. Well,
not only did I lose the book, I just lost you on my screens. Oh, there we are. Okay, you're hidden. That's all. I found it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the example that they give there, which is a little bit hard for me to read, but I'll see what my memory's like, is depression. It's a psychological condition, but it's caused by a lot of interplaying components, right? So genetics, hormone imbalances, thought patterns, environmental pressures, and effective treatment should take all of these things into consideration, right? So basically, Dr. Engel came up with the idea, the concept that illness doesn't occur in a vacuum generally. And, when you're treating something like a broken arm, you may know all of the causes that went into that condition, right? Like, I was riding a horse, I fell off the horse, my weight, came down on my arm, and the bone wasn't strong enough to hold it up. But when you get into other conditions, and one of the ones that I found really interesting was chronic pain, you start dealing with a lot of things that are less clear, right? And for doctors, clinicians, physiotherapists, massage therapists, the whole gambit of healthcare providers, this provides a useful model to the proponents, anyway, who believe in it, provides a useful model for considering the factors that go into something like chronic pain.
Yeah. And so just on the outside, this looks very, very similar to Dr. Chestnut's version, right? I mean, and in another comparison, I don't know if you do know, I've been doing a pretty deep dive into Ayurvedic medicine, and I'm like a little obsessed with it, actually.
That's
And I'm on like a 10-day trial, I guess you'd say, 10-day challenge about the natural law. And the natural law is what is the Anglicized version of Ayurvedic is. And so with that, they also talk about very, very similar type things. I mean, there's what you do physically, there's to keep yourself in good health, what food choices you have, how much sleep you get, all those kind of things. There's what you do in terms of your psychological well-being, kind of a thing, that you meditate, that you affirm, positively, that kind of a thing, that you treat yourself well, you treat yourself with kindness and love. And then there's the social things, which predominantly similar to Dr. Chestnut and similar to Dr. Engel, is that, you kind of how we are human beings need other people. That's connection is super, super important to us. And then, so the connection with other human beings, and connection with community, and kind of how your contribution, how you contribute to making a safer, better type of community, right? So, so a lot of similarities between this, and nobody's right or wrong. It's just kind of a different way to express kind of the same factors that impact us all. And then I think once you get those factors all kick in the right way, kind of a thing, you have a mission. You're looking after yourself physically, you're looking after yourself emotionally and mentally, you're doing all those things, and you are, you kind of have the motivation in terms of what your life purpose is and what kind of difference you're trying to make in the world, that then your health becomes better, and maybe even to the point where you have perfect health. Like you stay healthy, you stay with good energy, and you can sustain that state for a long period of time. I mean, we're all going to die, and those things are going to happen. But I mean, there's people that are in their 90s that are still productive and still making a difference and are moving easily and freely, and, have really good lives. Right. And so, I think all of them would have a good handle on those, on the biopsychosocial type of aspects of their life. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that was interesting when I looked at this is, your experience as, I guess I would say, an end user, just going back to my computer work, is that, a lot of Dr. Chestnut's work is, things to be actionable by you and I, and our viewers, is things to help you relate to what's happening, and ways to improve that. One of the things that sort of struck me about the angles and the development of this model is that it really is focused on being a tool for clinicians and health providers to make better diagnosis, to recommend treatment. And that's both a positive and a negative when you look at the pros and cons. But the biopsychosocial model is considered now more relevant than ever, even more relevant than it originally came out, because, as you correctly said, people are questing, if you will, for answers to their own health. We've sort of gone complete circle, where in our earliest years, basically taking care of yourself was the individual's responsibility. Medicine wasn't widespread. You might have a shaman or a healer or a wise person, but you were pretty much on your own, right? And then we've gone through a period of incredible specialization, where, you know, not only do you have a family doctor, you may have a half dozen or more specialists in different areas that, you know, are advising you. And the research that I was looking at said that that's changing, and the relevance of whole patient, as they call it in the UK, or, you know, the biopsychosocial model as we're looking at here, is incredibly relevant to what's happening with healthcare today. And so they're seeing a resurgent. Sorry, I've got something in my throat today. What a day. We see that there's a resurgence in interest in this, but there's a large discrepancy between the research that's been done and the actual application by healthcare providers and clinicians. And the articles that I read said a lot of that has to do with a disconnect in education.
Well, disconnect in general is dis-ease, right? We are meant to be connected. We're meant to have, you know, to be and rely on each other and have relation with each other. And that's kind of what creates kind of the richness of life, right? And anytime that you have disconnection in your body, that's disease, and disconnection in our community, how, you know, what does that express like? Well, racism is certainly one way that it expresses, right? But those kind of stigmatizing type things that separate people from other people. I mean, we went through a horrible disconnecting thing with COVID, right? And there's the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, and there's all this animosity and all this, you know, it was a horrible time. And plus, people, because of the physical isolation, were distanced from each other, disconnected from each other. Even, you know, they could not be with loved ones who were dying, kind of a thing, right? So that was a very major disconnection. I think we're coming around, to realize the importance of connection and realize how, you know, your well-being is as important as my well-being, and what I can do to support your well-being also supports my well-being, kind of a thing, right? We're all, like, in a sense, we all live with poverty, and we all live with racism, and we all live with violence, even if we're not living in those things, right? Mm-hmm. And so the more that we can connect, we take we lessen the impacts of the three evils there, racism and violence and poverty, and we kind of create a more caring collective environment in which we all benefit, right?
That's really interesting, and I think that your example highlights the fact that we've gone from a period, and I think historians, 20 years from now, will look back and assign greater significance to COVID and the cultural shifts resulting from that whole period than we even give them now, because I think there was some really significant shifts in our thinking. One of the things that we had to deal with was uncertainty in medicine. I think we went through a period where we really believed that Western medicine could give us right or wrong answers about our health. And it was definitive. That's it. Doctor diagnoses you, and I'm not slamming doctors, they've saved my life a couple of times, is that, medicine was the answer. It was fact-based. There was no gray area. It was this or it was that. And during COVID, the general consensus is we're not sure. I mean, we had the world's best doctors and healthcare providers standing up and saying, our best guess is this. We don't really know for sure. And I think that bubble was sort of broken. And that's one of the reasons they give for the model not being applied in education, because it's very open-ended. It's not a very clean, specific way to diagnose or answer something. It's too inclusive. And that in some thinking makes it less practical as a diagnostic tool. But I think the population, like you were giving examples of, were more open to saying, okay, there's maybe not an exact answer for the situation, but there's influences, there's adjustments that I can make given what I do know.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true. Hey, let's look at that other slide where it connects it interplays how those
Oh
three
yeah,
work together.
that's a
Okay,
great slide.
let me get that one up here too.
I think this is a really useful tool when you're thinking about your own health and you're thinking about the people you love or loved ones. We talked about symptom checkers, and I think this model is great. This is of course, a Venn diagram that shows our three, biological, social, and psychological there, and put some examples in it. And as we've talked about social, I love how this talks about those connections, right? Your peers, your family, school, education, those places that we're connected in and communing with people. It's a sort of sign of the times that religion isn't in there, because for many, many centuries in human existence in many places in the world, religion is a large social component, and would fit in this diagram as well. Psychological, your self-esteem, coping skills. I did want to share an article with you on that one, just as a tiny bit aside, and I thought this was really interesting. Let me just pull it up here. Yeah,
Sure.
it's an article called Bridging the Gap Between Emotion and Cognition, in a book written by Sylvain Laborde in Performance Psychology 2016. And it talks about that when people are engaging in a task, we evaluate both the demands of the task and the resources that we possess to deal with those demands. And that gives us two types of situations. And those situations are a threat, or I want to make sure I get the other word right. State. A challenge state or a threat state. So if we believe that we have enough resources for the task at hand, whatever that task is, whether it's improving ourselves, it's completing some work. If we believe we have enough resources, our bodies go into what's called a challenge state. If we don't believe we have enough resources, we go into what's called a threat state. And this article outlines how we measure those. They're actually measured by heart rate. They're actually measured by hormone release of the body. So they can empirically measure how you respond to a task, whether your body is going into a challenge mode or whether it's going into a threat mode. And I thought that was really fascinating, because it talks about how, often we use surveys to say, well, how do you feel about this? Do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel capable? And a lot of research criticizes those responses not being empirical, right? There are so many different ways. But this particular article has very scientific, empirical ways to record how we respond psychologically and biologically to the demands around us. Isn't that interesting?
It is. Yeah. And it makes a lot of sense. So it's not the situation, it's our perception of the situation, right? And if then we think that we have resources to be able to meet that challenge, whatever that challenge is, then that is just something that is going to elevate us to do our best, kind of a thing, right? Whereas we believe that challenge is, or that event is, something that there's no way we can ever overcome, or never achieve, like a toxic stress kind of a situation, then we withdraw, we hunker down, we basically withdraw from it, right? So
and according to this article, our bodies actually respond. So, and it was in relationship to the Venn diagram you just had up, and that psychological sphere. They're saying that in clinical evaluation, it's not so much about the feeling, it's about how you physiologically respond, both your heart rate and your endocrine system and your hormone system. And that changes how we think, right? Depending on what is pumping into your body, your heart rate controls how much oxygen we get in our system, which controls so many other things, right? Like breath is so important. So I really am excited about the idea of being able to measure psychological responses in relation to that entire diagram. I thought that was a pretty interesting idea. What do you think?
Yeah. Did you want to see that diagram again, or did you want to speak?
I think if we can bring it up again, Al, just
Sure.
so Um,
Mm.
because that's what one of the big objections to. So when I research these things, I always look at the pros and the cons. And one of the big cons, the reason that it seems to be under-taught in medical training, is because it's so general and because it's not empirical in all of the areas. But this article was saying that actually there is ways to measure the psychological part of this Venn diagram, right? So that takes it back into that clinical use of diagnosis, and not just in terms of a psychologist or somebody that deals with those types of responses, but also medical responses, which then I think updates this as an even more powerful clinical tool.
It just occurred to me as well, like, when you talk about a situation, it could be viewed as a challenge or what was the other term again?
Threat or challenge.
Threat or challenge. And it's kind of based on your perception of your ability to rise to that event and succeed, or, that kind of a thing. It also kind of makes me think of the whole connectivity with others. If you have a friend you can call, even if they can't help you, but they can commiserate and listen to you and, share your sorrow or celebrate your joys, that is also a way that you have capacity that you could view that instead as a challenge and not a threat.
Exactly. And it's really, I think, pointed that this isn't about your actual ability or your actual resources. It's, as you correctly said, it's about your perception of your resources and abilities versus the task at hand. And that translates to a very physiological response.
I started a new practice recently. I've started quite a few new practices, but one that I've been doing is, and this is like, let's say I can't sleep. I can breathe, but I can't sleep. So I don't stress about, say, oh, damn it, I'm going to be tired tomorrow or something like that. What I do is basically just focus on my breath. And then as I inhale, I focus on light, love, and connection, that is what I'm inhaling, light, love, and connection. And that my exhale is a release of everything that does not serve me, i.e. shame, guilt, fear, those kind of things. So inhale, light, love, and connection. Exhale, everything else, everything that no longer serves me.
Gone.
Pardon me?
I said, it's just out of there, gone. You get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to release that. Not going to focus on that. Going to release that. I'm not going to hold on to that and make any judgments about myself, because I am, and I'm convincing myself with that breathing practice that I am light and love and connection, and that's my function. That's how I'm going to move through the world. So yeah.
When I was studying comparative religion, of course, I come out of a Christian background, so I'm pretty versed in the whole redemption and all of those things. But when I started to look at Buddhism, one of the things that a really important concept, and not just in Buddhism, but key to Buddhism, is the idea of non-attachment, right? And trying to understand non-attachment was a little bit difficult from a Christian background, because, of course, we're taught that love, which is an attachment, is an important part of being a Christian and being a good person and all those things. And Buddhism doesn't say that love is bad, but if love creates an attachment that, as you said, where you can't let go of all the negative things, right? So you don't necessarily have to create attachments to the positive things. You can accept them, but you definitely don't want to create attachment to the negative responses. And that fits right into what we're talking about here, where your body responds to a psychological question that you pose to yourself. Do I have the resources for this, or don't I? And your body decides from that, is it a threat or is it a challenge? And we act according to that. So yeah, I think that exercise is a great way to overcome attachment, because we do become attached to very negative things. Negative things are addicting, just as addicting as positive things, if we assign values to them. You and I talked about that 4 or 5 months ago, right? Adjusting your assignment of pleasure. Who was that?
Impossible, Scott. We never repeat ourselves on this program. Never.
No, but that was, you shared with me an article or a book about a doctor that was talking about reprogramming yourself, like comfort food. Comfort food is only comfort food because you assign it that label, right?
Dr. James Chestnut. Yeah, that's who it was. That basically you have to, that his theory was that you need to love the things that you have the long-term value for you, right? You could love that bag of chips or that box of cookies, but it's not in terms of its long-term value for you. It's that comfort is giving you right now. So if you learn to love and think about, I'm going to consume this because it's going to be good for me now, but it's also going to be good for me, tomorrow and next week and next month, kind of a thing, right? And so that's what, is kind of a reprogramming, so that you get to that, you decide the choices you're going to make are what is good for you now and good for your long-term well-being as well, right? As opposed to, trying to create a feeling by eating something that reminds you of when you were, safe and warm and a child and you had a ice cream or whatever. And then that, made you feel comforted at that point, but it served nothing to your nutritional needs. It only served that emotional type need. So that's another James Chestnut nugget. There we go. That's what
I'm pretty sure there was another person that we looked at that was quite similar, but it all ties into this idea. And I think going back to Kay's comment about how they were related, is I think that this model is, again, more concerned about being inclusive of the multiplicity of factors that result in poor health or conditions like chronic pain. There was a whole, tons of articles. This is incredibly well researched, which I found interesting because I hadn't really ran across it before. But there are hundreds of articles and journals that have covered this topic, and increasingly so since about the 2000s. It's become, every year more and more work is done in this area. So I think it's going to become a more important part of our healthcare, and I think that there's more empirical ways to assess that psychological, social. And I think the social part of it is maybe the most difficult, right? Because in some cultures, some things are bad and some other things are good, right? I know that in part,
Scott, let me just interject one thing. Remember with Dr. James Chestnut, he had his thing put down 10 attributes of what a good human being is like, right? And those, he felt, and I agree, are universal, right? If no matter what your language, no matter where you are in the country, in the world, if you said, hey, list 10 things in your voice in terms of from your perception of what makes a good human being, you're going to come up with like 7 out of the 10 are going to be the same from every person in the world, right? And the ones that are variances are small variances, more to do with terminology or language differences than actual differences, right?
Absolutely. But I think there is some cultural differences. I absolutely agree with what you're saying, and Dr. Chestnut's, because we tried it and our lists were, the same, and had my family do it and they were basically the same, different words, but the same values. But there are differences. And I know, for example, when I studied religion, I specialized specifically in iconography and symbolism. And if we look at parts of Asia, Buddhist is really robust, right? Like I would be a skinny Buddha for some cultures. And then in other cultures, and that's associated with prosperity because a lot of people were starving. So somebody that could become, quite rotund and jolly was somebody that was happy and successful, right? And in other cultures, Buddha is very slender and, almost emancipated or emasculated. No, skinny as heck. And again, that's for different cultural values, right? Where where they associated overweight with other values. And I look at Christianity, for example, during the German Gothic tradition, Jesus on the cross was horribly depicted, like his ribs stuck out and the pain was so visible. But, later depictions of Jesus in a Protestant tradition, Jesus was kind of a healthy, happening guy, right? And I think that's one of the challenges for this model when we deal in culture, is some signals weigh heavier than other signals in different cultures in terms of that threat challenge assessment, right? Like for overweight, in some cultures, being slightly overweight or somewhat overweight is considered a positive thing. Like you don't, the ideal perfect woman during the Victorian age was plump or heavy by, the sort of twiggy, starving model period that we've gone through recently. So I think there's complexities in social and culture that affect this model that are going to be hard to solve.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to try this out on you, see what you think of this.
Mm-hmm.
So the social part of it, and I was talking about connection, or we were talking about connection and how important connection is, right? In terms of just our journey through life kind of a thing, that those connections are really what the relationships are result in, like 90% of our happiness, right? How much money we have after a certain level, like there's a kind of a minimum threshold, but once that minimum threshold is reached, then the more money you have doesn't necessarily make you happier, right?
Mm-hmm.
And fame doesn't necessarily make you happier. There's lots of people who have been, incredibly wealthy and incredibly famous who are miserable and committed suicide, right?
Yeah.
So their connection to each other is so important. And the way I see it is that kind of links in, that social part also links in with spiritual part. And why I say that is that I think, and there's a lot of, and this isn't just my idea, a lot of people would agree with this, and a lot of people stated that I'm borrowing from them, is that we are all spiritual beings who are having this human experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we have that human experience? By interconnecting and by interacting with other human beings, right? And if we have that mindset that we are a spiritual being who ultimately is going to return to spirit when this life is over, and further, that came to this life with a specific mission in mind, a specific purpose, something that they wanted to achieve. And at the moment of their birth, they knew what it was. And then now perhaps they've lost what that was. But you get to the point where if you can figure out what that is again, and then you're focused on that, and then that by necessity has to involve other human beings, which creates more connection. So if we're all spiritual beings that are having this human experience, and we all have these bodies that we get to for this purpose, right? And we all have the same beautiful rhythm in our chest and the same miracle of breath entering our bodies, that is our connection, and that the more we can connect, the more we can see the spiritual, the God in others kind of a thing, then the easier life becomes to navigate, and the more enjoyable it is, the more that you have those connections, right? And things like COVID did, or even just like when we went from being communal in nature to living in a big home by yourself kind of a thing, there was, in a 2,000 square foot home, there could have been 20 people living in it, 100 years ago. Yeah. And now there's like one, right? And you drive in and you open the garage door and you drive in and close the door behind you. You never see another person. You're looking at your devices, you're looking at the TV, that kind of a thing, but you're not connecting with other human beings. So I think the social is also kind of extends to the spiritual, is kind of the way I'm seeing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and really well said. And it inspired me to think about the idea that for 9 months, we're not only in communion with somebody, we're tethered to that person.
Yes.
That person feeds us and nurtures us without any conscious thought. Like we're born into communion with another being, or with our mothers. And that's a really powerful image when you think about it. And so being separated, I've read some really interesting work on how when the cord's cut and we're physically separated from our mother, that's a very traumatic experience to us psychologically, even though we can't necessarily articulate that separation. But it is interesting, if we later choose to isolate ourselves, that our nature is to be connected. That's how we're
Mhm.
brought into this world physically, right?
Yeah. No, I think that makes I think there's a lot of merit to that. And if you think about it the other way, what are the, the things that separate us, or when we are separated, that's like a penalty, that's a punishment, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
when if you were in a communal environment and you were told that you had to leave the tribe, that could be your, like, death would be near, right? Kind of a thing.
Ostracization. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in lots of cultures, children, it's really interesting because when the girls were born, um, uh, many Asian cultures, not just Asian, but very prevalent, certainly where we were, is co-bedding, where the children sleep with the parent, usually with the mother. Often the dad will sleep in another room, but sometimes all together until they're quite old by our standards, where the parenting books that we read from a Western perspective said that, oh, you have to put them down the hall and close the door and let them cry to develop their strength and independence and ability to deal with, hardship and all of these things, where our Japanese nannies and, people that were around us were saying, no, you keep them with you, you build their confidence, you teach them that they're safe and that they always have a safe place to return to. And it was almost mind-blowing how opposite. And these were by doctors, and these were not by just wives' tales. They were genuine theories about which created a happier, more content human being.
Hmm.
Very interesting.
I got to tell you a story. This week I volunteered for Family Center, have this thing, Big Chef, Little Chef, and so mom
Already
and
sounds wonderful.
oh yeah, so mom and their child, who's usually like 5 years old or somewhere around that age, kind of thing, come and they make some stuff at the community kitchen down at the Interfaith Food Bank. And so there's a little community kitchen, and they come, and so we made applesauce muffins and hot chocolate.
Oh,
And so, but it was really great interacting with these kids and, having fun with them and listen to their stories and, what they wanted to show. But then one mom had her little baby there who was like, I don't know, 3 months old, kind of a thing. And what is that child's name? Celeste, I think it was. Celeste. Anyway, so the child was a little bit fussy, this young girl. So
as sometimes they want to be, yes.
yeah. And so I picked her up, and for like, I don't know, a half hour, that's all I did was hold this young girl and sing to her. And it was such an enjoyable experience. I mean, it was so much fun. So yeah, made her laugh, made her smile, and it was as enriching for me as it was for her. So yes.
It's really true. We're going through this thing right now where we're probably going to be adopting Momo's sister. Momo's our pug, and her mother had another litter, and we've been sort of watching because brindle pugs are quite rare. We have a brindle Akita anyway. So, and we're talking about it, and the big discussion about who gets to bond with the puppy, like who gets to be their primary love giver, right? Because dogs, and I imagine people are like that too. They love everyone in the pack, but of course they normally have one parent that they gravitate to when they have a problem or when they want some extra love or stuff. And just that drive to share the love you have inside you is a really primal need. I know that people who aren't into animals probably would have thought we were crazy. Your wife would have understood immediately because that's how she is with her horses, right? But
yeah. Oh, there's people with their furry friends that their relationships are as important, maybe more important than human friends, right? So yeah, human connection.
It was our golden retriever that helped me get through right after the coma. He would sit with me, a puppy, like just old enough to be away from his mother, and he wouldn't go pee. He would hold it until somebody came, because I was pretty much bedridden for a few months after I got out of coma, and he would stay with me and not whine or he sensed the situation. And I consider him one of my primary caregivers during that time, because psychologically I had to wake up and I had to be there for him, and he really provided that. Other people would think it nuts, but I think it goes back to that idea you said about spiritual and social value. It's natural to us. And modern life, I don't know where we started deciding those things were bad, right? Like, I don't know, but I think the pendulum is swinging back, like you said.
I think it is too. I think it is. there's a greater awareness of how important we are to each other and how important connection is to our our individual and our collective well-being. So yeah.
Anytime
So
there's been a global conflict or, a pandemic like the Spanish flu or the bubonic plague, humanity does tend to remember to be nicer to each other for a while.
yes.
And, and yes, there's all sorts of prejudice and horrible things that come about because of that. And we're certainly in conflict in lots of areas in the world right now. But, on the street level, I think there is more concern for each other's well-being. And I know because of COVID we got to know all of our neighbors here because
Mm,
we were all isolated. We were at home, we could see each other, waving through the window, or when you were out washing your car. And after COVID, if somebody's car isn't working, any neighbor who comes out goes over to them and say, oh, do you need some help? It wasn't like that before COVID, where
yeah.
everyone was in their car and gone by 7:30 because they had to work at 8. They come home at 4:30, rush in the house, pop on their favorite show or whatever it was, maybe drink in the backyard or whatever. But yeah, I agree with you, Al. I think there's a change that's occurred, and I hope that we can continue that.
I agree. So, Kay, thank you for your share with us. We very much appreciate that. And thank you for introducing us to Dr. Ingalls and about this previous predecessor to Dr. Ingalls in the 1950s when this concept was shared as well. And they certainly all have merit. There's certainly a different voice kind of expressing very, very similar sort of concepts. And thank you for that. And we look forward to any of our viewers who want to share with us and guide us. Scott, I'm going to make a bold statement here. We might not know everything. It's a potential that's true.
I was going to say that we never have answers. We have more questions. We just ask each other a whole complete 45 minutes of questions. But I think that was like the point that Kay shared this with us, is that it does give you more questions to ask, right? If you're unhealthy, it's a model for saying, okay, don't just look at the physical, biological side of it. Consider the psychological environment, consider your social economic environment, and look at how you can improve those things. Maybe you can't change the biological, but maybe you can change those other things, which help. We've all heard stories how people who've been diagnosed with terminal illnesses or things, they change their lifestyle and they live a lot longer than they were diagnosed, and a much better quality of life.
Hey, have you watched the Blue Zones limited series on Netflix?
No, not yet. Is it good? I started it, but then we got busy.
Yeah, it's great. And speaking of that, there was a guy that was from Greece initially, and he moved to America, and he had like car dealerships, like, I don't know, 20 car dealerships, right? And he was super, super successful, that kind of thing. He gets a diagnosis that he's got terminal cancer. He's got like 3 months to live. And so he says, you know what? I'm going to go home to Greece and just like, reconnect with family, that kind of a thing. I don't have long to live. So he goes home, and it happened to be the time when you would plant a vineyard. So he thought, I'm going to plant a vineyard, spend some time in the soil, that kind of thing. So he plants a vineyard, and, never expecting he's going to be there to see the fruit of his labor. Right. But he's there next year, and he's there next year, and he's there next year, and he's there next year. And so he lives like 25 years or something. The terminal diagnosis just kind of disappears because he's there connected with his culture and connected with the land and connected with something he loves, right? His car dealerships and making money, that was kind of to live the American dream, but but getting back to his roots and that connectivity is really what made a big difference. And one of the things they talk about too in Greek type cultures is where it's not so important what you ate the night before, but who you ate with. Like that you didn't like sit in front of the TV and shovel in a microwave dinner, that you had a connection with somebody, you talked to somebody, you learned about their day or their life, or learned they told you a joke or sang you a song or whatever it was. So that, anyways, it's a beautiful little series. I think it's 4 episodes, but yeah.
But I think another area that we need to increase a bit is, and I'm not it's obviously there's risks associated, but I know that in our house, a lot of exchange students visit our house because the girls are mentors in the exchange program and whatever. But like every holiday, we always have a bunch of foreign kids here. And as you said, it's wonderful because they share their stories and they share their joy and they share their pain. And it just revitalizes everyone because we've made a new connection. And, then 4 months later, we'll get an email or a postcard from one of the kids saying, "Oh, I had so much fun. And how are you doing?" And the value of that is immeasurable, just opening our hearts and our home up a little bit, right?
I've never done it, but there's a lot of people in my Rotary Club who have been a host family to an exchange student, right? And
Mhm.
those relationships that they form and the connection they have, like my friend Scott, he went to Europe recently to visit, and he went and visited like a half a dozen exchange students that he had hosted here in Canada, and it was
Mhm.
just like this big, homecoming, this huge reunion, reconnection, reunion. There you go. That's the word I was looking for. Reunion with these, beautiful human beings that he had the opportunity to see when they were way younger and how their lives had progressed and what things were important to him. And so, those kind of things, the connection and the friendships and the value that comes for both parties to that relationship are huge, right?
Well, the twins, and it's amazing when they travel, they almost never pay for a hotel room because they stay with people that have stayed here.
Yeah, yeah.
And, it amazes me because, of course, if I went somewhere, I might arrange to meet somebody for lunch or something if I knew somebody in that country. But these kids exchange, and that's why when people say, "Oh, well, kids today," and I think, well, yeah, but there's some great things about kids today too. And,
Very
and
much.
I know that age group is sort of going back to that barter system where you take care of me and I'll take care of you, and we'll both be better for the experience, which I think
Hmm.
is wonderful.
Beautiful. Yeah. Scott, I think we should take her home. Wrap her up there, buddy.
Absolutely. From my good friend, and an important part of my connection and my communion, the acapellist Alan Friesen, and myself, Scott Sweetman. Visit us next week, 7 p.m. We'll be here with a lot more questions and probably even less answers.
All right. Thank you.